Thank you so much. That was just really illuminating and thought-provoking. Thank all three of you very much. We're very grateful for your participation, and we're going to move on quickly to the next part of the program. Again, I'm going to ask people to be friendly and move away from the aisle towards the middle or towards the edges, because there's still people standing in the back who'd like to be seated. So now I'd like to bring two former public utility commissioners up to visit with us today, starting with our own Phyllis Rio, who was a Minnesota commissioner, and she will introduce Kelly Speakes-Backman of the Energy Storage Association. Come on up. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's really wonderful to see such a big crowd here for this important event. It is my distinct honor to introduce to you my friend and the first Chief Executive Officer of the Energy Storage Association, Kelly Speakes-Backman. As most of you are aware, the Energy Storage Association is the national trade organization for the energy storage industry. And as CEO, she leads the association's efforts to represent the interests of energy storage in the United States, including policy, external relations, and industry leadership. Prior to joining ESA, Kelly was part of the executive team at Alliance to Save Energy, a premier trade association representing the energy efficiency sector. And prior to that, Kelly served as the commissioner at the Maryland Public Service Commission, and also as Director of Clean Energy for the Maryland Energy Administration. And as a commissioner, that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Kelly. We served around the same period of time and sat on a number of NARUC committees together. Kelly has spent more than 20 years working in energy and energy efficiency, sustainability, renewables, environmental business strategies, and now she will be focusing on energy storage, and of course all of these issues are intertwined, so her background and experience will add a tremendous amount to her new responsibilities. She earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Boston University. So please join me in giving a warm Midwestern welcome to Kelly Speakes-Backman.
Thank you, Phyllis, for such a lovely introduction, and thank you all for having me here. Thanks to Ellen and the Energy Transition Lab for inviting me to speak today. And thanks for the Midwestern. I grew up in Ohio, so I kind of feel like I'm back home a little bit. It's kind of nice. Although my mother would not be so excited to see that I'm here in Minnesota and not in Ohio cheering on the Buckeyes. So. For those of you who don't know the Energy Storage Association, as Phyllis mentioned, we're the National Trade Association for Energy Storage, working toward a more resilient, efficient, sustainable, and affordable grid for all. We have more than 150 companies that represent a diverse group of energy service companies, independent power producers. We have utilities, financiers, insurers, law firms, installers, manufacturers, component suppliers, and integrators, all involved in deploying energy storage across the globe. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about energy storage and how we see it playing out in the marketplace. We see it as a critical hub for the entire grid, augmenting all the resources from clean energies such as solar and wind and hydro to more centralized traditional resources such as nuclear and fossil fuels to the demand side resources and system efficiency assets. To quote my friend Catherine Hamilton of 38 North Solutions, energy storage is the bacon of the grid. It just makes everything better. There's a reason that energy storage is so exciting and so popular lately, and also why it's really difficult to unbundle. Number one, there are multiple technologies that are deployed to store energy today. Number two, it's becoming increasingly cost-effective all across the grid, from transmission all the way down to on-site applications. And number three, there are a multitude of participants seeking either savings or revenues from multiple value streams from the single source that it creates. So it's a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, right? So we're kind of trying to put all the pieces and parts together and line them up so that you can get the most value out of a single resource. Storage is the application of different technologies. It includes electrochemical, thermal, mechanical, process, and pumped hydro storage. We talk a lot about battery storage. Much of the conversation in Claire's discussion was also on batteries, but we know there are a lot more than that. Here in the Midwest, Great River Energy has that cooperative that's exploring the potential of grid interactive water heating storage, which is really exciting. It includes hot water, bringing that into aggregated demand response. So that's a really exciting, another type of application of storage. Energy storage systems are proven, they're cost-effective, and they provide a wide array of services, including capacity. They can provide energy. They provide ancillary services, as was described a little bit earlier by our regulators. And they can provide also transmission and distribution offsets, if you will, so they can delay or defer transmission and distribution upgrades by being installed in specific locations. For example, one of the examples is in PJM, systems are performing frequency regulation. In California, they're procured to provide localized capacity for congestion relief and demand response for the system. Storage has been deployed to maintain reliability while multi-year upgrades are undertaken. An example of that is AEP's Presidio project in Texas and Balls Gap project in West Virginia. Those are batteries are used there to maintain reliable service while the transmission upgrades are being completed. The third part about why this makes this all so complicated is systems are owned, operated, and deployed by all grid stakeholders, or can be, I should say. There's a lot of different business models that are out there that are still being tested and that industry is leveraging. One example of that is the Penn Station in Denver, where there's a transportation hub and a work-live development that deploys a microgrid with solar storage. And that storage system capacity is owned by 3 different entities, and they produce 5 different revenue streams. They're owned by Panasonic, which is the customer, Unicos is the developer, and Excel is the utility. Each of them leverage their own part for capacity for their own benefits. Today, there are 800 megawatts worth of storage in the US today. We see a vision where we think that there can be 35 gigawatts by 2025. We'll be releasing a report later this year on how we believe we can get there. We think that 35 gigawatts of storage on the grid is going to impact and transform the entire power system. The thing is, policies have to keep pace with the advances of technologies, with the advances of markets, and with increasingly sophisticated consumer demands. So I'll talk about 2 things in that area of where policy needs to be addressed. One is in the valuation, especially in integrated resource planning, and the other is in more specific valuation of consideration for reliability and resilience. The grid was originally built, of course, at a time when cost-effective energy storage systems weren't widely available. Electricity was a single direction. It was generated centrally and distributed through fully regulated entities at a pace that really sufficiently followed information flow. In this scheme, it was fine for least cost planning solely and alone. But today, as information flow accelerates, technologies advance, and consumer demands for more reliable and resilient electricity become more sophisticated. We've moved toward grid modernization and a more flexible and responsive grid, and the time has come to reevaluate the way we cost and the way we value system planning. Costs for modern energy storage systems are plummeting rapidly, dropping more than 80% in the last 2 years for commercial and industrial customers. Over the last 8 years, costs on the grid side have gone more than 70%. I'll just point out an example. In the cost curve that was presented earlier today, there was an assumption of $1,000 per kilowatt hour for energy storage. The last GTM report had it at 650 to 700. These costs are coming down quickly. And I think that's an important point, that when we talk about regulatory frameworks and having the right data available and having the understanding of costs available in order to make the right decisions for future, that we keep up to speed on how quickly this is becoming commercial. It's important that utilities and PUCs keep up-to-date cost data on these rapidly declining systems so as not to lock themselves into long-term investments based on outdated cost and operational data. Also, energy storage provides multiple services for the grids, and rules should be revised to monetize these values. We heard a little bit earlier about the ancillary services that storage systems can provide, and that includes things such as black start, frequency regulation, ramping, and peak shaving. They also absorb oversupply from both the inflexible and the non-dispatchable resources. They defer or augment costly T&D upgrades, and they provide emergency power and energy during outages, serving as islands of refuge. If we only allow a single revenue stream to be captured for this multitude of values that are delivered, then we're stranding value every day. We talk about stranded costs, and that's real and it's true, but there is also a stranded value that we are beginning to see left on the table. And so that's why it's so important to include energy storage systems into open and transparent planning, long-term planning, so that utilities can operate more efficiently. If we're calculating value and performance on, for example, a sub-hourly basis as opposed to just the hourly or the daily basis, then we can weigh all the assets on a level playing field from the perspective of performance and not just technology. We're seeing more robust IRPs, or I should say integrated resource plans, and distributed integrated resource plans becoming more common among utilities, and the results are really great. 33 states are required to undergo IRP planning processes today. 8 here in the MISO region have either IRP planning processes, they're developing IRP rules, or have long-term planning filing requirements. In Arizona, their IRPs called for hundreds of megawatts of energy storage systems to increase the grid flexibility and to increase the efficiency. There are a few lessons that we've learned from these IRP processes that are either underway or in place. One is that IRP modeling is not often granular enough. You have to look at that sub-hourly. 2 is looking at a net cost of capacity approach is an interesting perspective of figuring out how to get to that value versus cost. And what I mean by that is the net cost of capacity is equal to the total installed cost minus the total operational benefits all along the grid. Third is that there are already several commercial models, Plexos, ETAP, OpenDSS, Storage VET, that examine intra-hourly dynamics. So there are technologies that are out there that can help you to do this analysis on a sub-hourly basis. And fourth is that the operational benefits of storage could include the avoided costs, like reducing operating reserve requirements, reducing renewable energy curtailments, reduce local emissions for non-attainment restrictions. So those are 4 lessons that we've learned from already processes that are already gone underway, and we think there are more. My last point that I'll make is on reliability and resilience, and the value that brings. I think it's especially pertinent the last several weeks as we've seen so many storms coming through. First, I'll define reliability versus resilience, where reliability is the ability to maintain and match electricity supply and demand at every moment of the day during normal operations, even in the face of variable and sometimes extreme system conditions. Resilience, on the other hand, is the ability to recover or maintain from a disruptive external event. That could be physical, it could be cybersecurity, and it could be weather events. Energy storage systems provide flexibility for both the reliability or the normal operations side as well as the resiliency to ensure uninterrupted power delivered to consumers. While centralized generation can be very reliable in that normal operations, it can also be limited in its ability to adapt to location. It might not be able to provide that resilience that's needed that energy storage can help, while it's also doing its everyday job of helping to offset peak, et cetera. Sandy, Harvey, the polar vortex, all of these weather events have demonstrated the value and the importance of a more distributed grid, and energy storage can help with that. So the concept is reflected of reliability and resilience actually in the DOE report, where they talk about reliability and resilience, and in my mind, we're cautiously optimistic. It may not have been the intent of the DOE report to talk about energy storage and microgrids and distributed energy resources, but if we're focusing on the performance instead of the technologies, then that call for flexibility that came in that DOE report for both reliability and resilience is clearly a call for storage for DERs and microgrids. So thank you for your time and attention, and I'd love to answer some questions if there's any time.
Well, thank you very much. Let me get my mic here. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that wonderful presentation. And I hope members of the audience will write out a question on their cards, and Eric or somebody will come by and pick them up. But I'll start with a question while we're waiting for questions from the audience. And as a member of MESA, we are trying to look at issues and barriers to energy storage here in Minnesota and the Midwest. And one of the things that we're considering is developing an energy storage guide for state policymakers here in the Midwest. And so I wanted to pick Kelly's brain to see what would be her top 3 issues for inclusion in a policy-making context in such an energy storage guide here in Minnesota and the Midwest. And so I'll just throw it to you and see if you have any thoughts and ideas.
Sure. Is this on? Yeah, it is. So I think top of mind for the ability to enable the markets to recognize the values that storage brings is to create a policy framework and a regulatory framework that allows for storage to participate both on the retail side and the wholesale side of its values that it brings to the generation, to the distribution, and the transmission side equally. So to artificially limit its ability to have to pick a bucket, if you will, is unfortunate because, again, you're stranding value. The other thing I would say is creating a long-term vision through policy is important in states, and I think a lot of the state regulators and the state legislators can look to create that vision by setting incentives or targets or even mandates. I prefer targets myself because it sort of gives you where you want to be in that longer-term vision. So I think that's an important aspect as well.
Okay, thank you. And kind of attached to that is we are looking at barriers to the development of energy storage in the Midwest. And so I would like to ask Kelly, what barriers does she think needs to be removed before energy storage can be made even more beneficial to utilities, to utility applications, to grid applications, and to customer applications. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the barriers that face each of those sectors.
So first of all, artificially requiring storage to participate in only one bucket of the value that it brings is certainly a barrier. Number two, I would say that in our view, we think that every integrated resource plan should be required to consider storage as an alternative or as a potential for resource, either on the supply side or on the demand side. Whether it's in one region to offset the oversupply from renewables, or it's in another region to be able to create congestion relief, we think that a single resource, if placed properly, should be able to get that value, and I think that's a big barrier. The third is keep up to date on the cost data. You know, even just this morning, looking at $1,000 per kilowatt hour versus what it is today, which was reported just in August at $650. So keep up to date on the cost data and look at pricing forward, just as pricing forward happens in the natural gas markets. So I think that's another big impediment, is that the real value isn't being accounted for.
Okay, and just to follow up on that a little bit, you talked about in your presentation the IRP processes that we have in 33 states, I think you said,
Yes,
around the country, and 8 states in the MISO region. I know you've sort of just fairly gotten your feet wet here at the ESA, but
I'm 2 months in.
Yeah, can you comment on whether commissions around the country and also in the MISO region are looking at energy storage in their IRP processes? I know, like here in Minnesota, we are looking at demand response, and we look a lot at demand side management, and we look at all those types of things, as well as certain generation needs and so forth in the area. But is energy storage one of those factors that is looked at around the country, do you think?
I think it's increasingly becoming a fact, and that's really exciting. I mean, again, I was saying a little bit earlier that it's getting more and more attention because there are so many different players around the electricity industry that have some play in it, that can find some value in it, and so attention is being paid more and more. And yes, I think regulators are paying more and more attention to storage, but it's not being explicitly called out, and it's difficult to figure out what bucket it, again, I seem a little bit repetitive, but it's difficult for regulators to think outside the bucket, if you will. And so that's the big,
Yes.
that's the big issue.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, I'm
Yeah.
sure, everywhere. Oh, good. We do have some questions from the audience, and if I can read them and hold my mic at the same time,
My glasses.
that'll be great. I think I'm okay. Thank you. All right. The first question I have is, how do you think about the difference in value between transmission and distribution deployed storage?
I like that question a lot, because I'm thinking in terms of this graph that I have in my head of, along the top line, you can look at behind the meter, then you look at the distribution system, and you look at the transmission system, and then down the column you have in terms of the value that storage can bring in terms of seconds, in terms of minutes, in terms of hours, in terms of days and season. So if I'm just taking that one column of distribution versus transmission and behind the meter, there are a number of different systems that are values that can be brought. On the transmission side, you've got those ancillary services. You've got, of course, capacity, not so much energy today. On the distribution side, you can have energy. You've got some of that. You've got savings. You've got congestion relief, and you've got resilience values. And each of those play into a different time sector, if you will. So some of them are on the microsecond or the second level. Some of them can be participated in the as far down as the seasonal. When you're talking about offsetting transmission, that is a seasonal or even an annual offset.
Okay, thank you. This next question is, what is the main advantage for commercial industrial consumers to use energy storage, assuming they do not have their own solar and wind energy generation?
For those commercial and industrial customers, there are a number of different reasons why these entities may choose it. Some choose it because they're looking for better power quality. Some have their facilities located in an area that needs congestion relief, and they can use it for peak shaving. And some need to never be out. They have data centers, for example. They've got to be able to ride out these micro interruptions as well as regular interruptions.
Thank you. Are utilities applying standby tariffs to behind-the-meter storage projects? What is your
I don't know.
experience in that?
I don't know. I can't even make that up. I'm not sure, but it's a great question, and it's something that we need to look into. I'm sorry. Whoever asked that question, come find me later, and I will follow up.
Okay. I have two more questions, and I think we have 2 more minutes, so I think we'll get to them. What will it take to grid-enabled electric water heaters to become a large-scale reality? We don't make it easy for folks here in Minnesota.
Yeah, this is good. And understanding, first of all, participation by the public. And I think interest and participation in the sophistication of the public and how they use their energy is becoming more and more prevalent as you see a lot of these demand response programs being put together by utilities and commissions. So I think, first of all, just the understanding and the awareness of how that can bring value to both yourself and to your community is a big first step.
Thank you. And this last question is near and dear to my heart, and I think it kind of is a good question to end our discussion. Any thoughts on ESA, SEA, SEPA, grid alternatives, all led by women? Any thoughts?
That is so cool. It's really fun, actually. I was actually just having some conversations about, it's having women in leadership positions in the energy markets is not, hasn't been it's new, I should say, but there are an increasing number of women in leadership positions, not just on the policy side, but just on the nitty-gritty, the utility, like get it done kind of side. This is it's really fun, and I can't wait. I'm going to be speaking on a panel with Julia Hamm and Abby Hopper, not about women, but just about utility grid of the future, and that's going to be really fun to kind of play and riff. And I love that question. Thank you.
Very good. Well, join me in thanking Kelly Speakes-Backman.
All right. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. Yeah, and I might have invited a few women to come and speak here. Just a few. So thank you so much. It's time for a break. Take this opportunity to network, but be back promptly at 10:25 when we're going to start the policy panel. Thank you.